Hi there, my name is Chris Town, and today I get to geek out a little bit because this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and that is about the Great Migration, as well as the Chicago Defender, an African American newspaper based in Chicago, and its effect on the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the North. Now, before we get to know anything, we need to know what the Great Migration exactly was. Now, in the Deep South, this is mainly involved around the Deep South. We know about Jim Crow laws. Now, Jim Crow laws were segregationist laws that were existent on African Americans down south. These included such things as literacy tests for voting, as well as lynchings. Now, these were because African Americans, most of the African Americans were illiterate. This made it so that they could not vote in elections and such, as well as lynchings, scaring them into a sort of submission into a hierarchy down south. However, we need to look up north, where after the Civil War, the North started to industrialize a lot, especially in big cities such as New York, Chicago, Cleveland, etc. So we need to understand the North and South divide and why African Americans would want to come north in order to find industrial opportunity, because many of them were indentured servitudes, which meant they were paid very little money in order to do a lot of work, such as cropping and fielding. Now, this is where we enter in the Chicago Defender, because not a lot of African Americans knew about the opportunities that lay up north. Robert Sangstock Abbott created the Chicago Defender in 1905 in order to give a voice to this aspect, to give a voice to the African Americans and show them that there was opportunity up north, that there was a call to action, that there was fiery language in order to understand that they would not take the oppression of white people anymore, that there was a way to get out of it, which was the North. Now we got to answer the question. Its purpose was to do all this, but did it fulfill its purpose? That's what we got to ask. To what extent did the aspects of the Chicago Defender affect the Great Migration? Now, my thesis statement for this project is going to be, through smuggling its papers that advertise jobs, housing, tips, and stories of success of northern migration, the Chicago Defender had a great effect on the Great Migration through persuading thousands of African Americans to migrate to the north. Now, I want to reiterate that having a great effect does not mean a direct cause of the Great Migration. It did not directly cause the Great Migration, but rather it was a contributing factor to the Great Migration and its success. That's what we need to understand through going with this thesis statement. Now, before we dive in, we have to understand how media, or newspapers in this sense, affect social movements. Gamson is a professional on media studies, and what he talked about is the greater the resources, or the papers, and strategic planning of a movement, the greater its media standing and the more prominent its preferred frame will be in media coverage. Now, what we have to understand is that Robert Sangstock Abbott was able to get these newspapers distributed all across the South, going from only 50,000 people reading it to 250,000 people reading it. So that means he expanded his width and circumference of how many people he was reaching to, which grew the resources, the amount of papers that were being distributed, and the amount of people that were being influenced, making the Chicago Defender a lot more influential as a media source. Now, going into the Chicago Defender, we also have to understand Robert Sangstock Abbott himself. Now, he was born in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, the Deep South. He firsthand witnessed the brutality and oppression of African Americans down south. However, his family traveled to Gary, Indiana, and Topeka, Kansas, for example. Even though those areas were still oppressive, there was more opportunity. He liked that. He understood that there was more opportunity there than there was where he was born, where he was from, the region that he was from. So what he did was, as he grew up, he wanted to move to Chicago. And seeing all the opportunity, the industrial opportunity, the media opportunity, he saw it as an outlet to get African Americans who weren't as fortunate as he was, in order to step up and see what was going on in the North and how much opportunity there was. However, how is he going to do that? That's the question. there were a lot of things that were barring African Americans from seeing papers such as the Chicago Defender, such as Terrell, a professional on the Great Migration and migration within America, talked about. White distributors refused to circulate the newspaper, and the Ku Klux Klan and other groups confiscated the newspapers, took them away before it could be distributed, resulting in the newspaper being smuggled into 7 states. So Robert Sangside Abbott found a way around this barrier. He decided what he would do is he would smuggle them on freight trains in order to get to African Americans who would then read these in, say, churches, in their towns, and on their farms. Now, Robert Sangside Abbott, while being witty, he knew how to get to his audience. The first thing he did was covering the oppression that was happening in the Jim Crow South. Look at this, an example from an April 4th, 1925 edition of the Chicago Defender. Klan burns K on man's face. That's a fiery language. That's a screaming headline, as we call this in the journalistic world, where it's literally out there. It's out there in your face. So that's really fiery. It makes you feel empowered in a way as an African American, because you're saying this is unacceptable. This is inconceivable what they are doing to my race. So he utilized this to show the inequality of African Americans in Jim Crow South, to have more of a lens for them to realize what they were going through, and more reason to go up north, which we'll talk about just in a second. However, what's going to be up north? Okay, we know the South is oppressive, but what's up there in the north? Well, that's where he's really smart. He brings in job and housing offers that are up north. He gave tips on where in cities to settle in. For example, in New York City, Harlem was a big hub for many African Americans to travel to. He recommended many African Americans to go up there, to Harlem, in order to seek housing. Look at this, for example. This is a 1940 edition of the Chicago Defender. Hansberry decision opens 500 new homes to race. This is like, with this being said, these are so many opportunities for African Americans to have things up north. There's like so many opportunities up north. There are these things that you can just grab if you just move up north. This was also in relation with World War I. This was around the time that the Chicago Defender was really getting very popular. As Grossman and Bittner, who are both experts on the Great Migration of African Americans in America, talked about, advertisements directed at Black Southerners. Unlike earlier employment notices in the newspaper, these called for large numbers of workers and involved factory work. They were directly talking about how factories were being opened to multiple jobs. This was as white people were being shipped off to Europe in order to fight World War I. Now, of course, the army and the military branches are segregated at this point, so they can't do any of that. They can't go into the military. What are they going to do? They're going to go up north and find jobs. They're going to go to those factories and quote-unquote take white jobs. So, as Bittner also mentioned, taking advantage of the labor opportunities created by World War I, this emphasizes how they were able to take these advantages. There we go. Now, on top of this, there were many barriers. Okay, so now you have opportunity. Well, how am I going to get out north if the KKK and the white government are barring black people from moving up north? As Clark, another expert on the Great Migration, talked about, in response, as white Southerners observed train platforms packed with African Americans who are trying to leave the Jim Crow South, several cities passed ordinances that made it illegal for trains to accept prepaid tickets. Now, this was yet another barring barrage for them to get over. Luckily, Abbott had a great idea. He would, on top of giving the sources, on top of giving the jobs that were available, the opportunities that were available, he was going to say, now, here's how you get there. As Merriam, another expert on the Great Migration, talked about, Abbott, the publisher of the Chicago Defender, set up affordable rail prices to encourage migrants to travel in groups. This was one of his strategies for them to travel in groups. And to go on specific routes that had pro-migration conductors that wouldn't kick them off the trains. connecting with Northerners in advance to have housing, traveling on specific days such as holidays or late at night, and remaining cautious and dressing quote-unquote properly. Now, even on top of this, okay, now we have the tips, but why should I go? Could it be me? Am I going to be able to move north? Can I do it? I don't know if I can do it. So now what he does is he focuses on tales from the other side, success stories that have already happened. Now these were directed solely at people, at African Americans who might have family or might have friends who are already now in the north. Oh look, there's Gary. Wait, he moved up north. Maybe I can do that as well. As Miriam also points out, he also focused on reporting on tales of the successful African Americans, and Gregory further elaborates on this by talking about pilgrimage stories. Now, pilgrimage stories were very popular around the 1910s, around the time the Chicago Defender was getting very popular. So as these pilgrimage stories were being set, it created an adventure sense of opportunity, of the adventure that is to come to be expected. And that really made a lot of African Americans want to move up north because of that. Now further on, now we know all the facts about how Abbott was able to persuade African Americans, but what was the actual effect? We don't know the actual effect just yet. However, Gregory, who was also a Great Migration professional, made an interactive map online for you to click on any census, and what it allows you to do is see how many African Americans from each of these states, like say Mississippi, moved to each northern state. And it shows a tremendous increase in population over time. For example, we go from 1910, where the Chicago Defender was just first coming around. You see that levels are very low, only in like just under 100,000 in the most populated states with most African Americans. But as World War I is coming along, as it is bringing more information to the table about these job opportunities, about these things that you can do and the possibilities up north, you see the rates starting to increase. Furthermore, during World War II, jobs are increasing. African Americans' populations are increasing. Furthermore, in 1970, when the Great Migration is coming to a slow, you've seen amazing, tremendous, gigantic levels of African Americans coming to states up north. It just shows the amount of African Americans that have chosen to now move up north because the Chicago Defender was able to provide this information for them. Without this, they never knew anything. So we can come with a somewhat of a correlation between this and the Great Migration. Overall, what are we getting from this? From what we're seeing, Abbott's main purpose for the Chicago Defender was to get African Americans fired up. They don't want the oppression anymore. They want to fight back against it. But they can't fight in Jim Crow South. They're not allowed to. Then they got to move somewhere else to find that opportunity, to find that promised land that they want so much, to find a new adventure of the pilgrimage that have stories, that have reckoned stories around the country at this point. He was able to provide tips for how to get up north, what was there up north as jobs, as houses, where they were located, and the oppression that was going on. And furthermore, that there was success, that there were people who were able to come up north. And these maps of demographics and census really do show somewhat of a correlation, which is why we are concluding that the Chicago Defender did have a great effect on the Great Migration because of its methods that it used in its sources. And here is a list of references I used in my presentation. Thank you very much.